Hey, so in the last video we were talking about radical empiricism and how our our very fundamental experience of reality is oneness, not two-ness. There's no subject and object. Subject and object don't even arise until after we conceptualize, which has a few implications, and which in Buddhism and in Eastern philosophy have implied that there is no real subject-object. These are illusory. They're fabrications, abstractions. They're real as abstractions, but the ego doesn't really exist. And this recognition is something that you try to maintain and see permeate your being. Um, so this sort of ego death is a big issue in Buddhism, and it's very not always so liberating. I mean, it is liberating, but it's also a death. It's a death of the belief in the self, and this can be very traumatic. It can be well, people may not want to have that happen, so they find more psychological escapes. So this isn't necessarily a path, a golden path to enlightenment. Um, it's a dangerous path where you have to face yourself, and you have to face who you really are. So a lot of people don't like that about Buddhism, so they'll idealize it as this feel good sort of thing, or any kind of Eastern meditation. Um, but it has its benefits as well. It's beautiful, it's transformative, it's transcendent in the sense that you become released from the subject object duality and the insecurities that arise from it, um, and you begin to experience life more fully, and not in any kind of naive sense, but in a very direct sense. You feel less you have less psychological blocks and entanglements with emotions, and you become much more open to others and receptive, um, which can be difficult in a world that has everybody living within their own walls of psychological security. So there are ups and downs, yes, but I would argue that this form of development, um, I know Ken Wilber talks about this as being something that's transpersonal. It's transcendent. It's like post ego, basically. We grow an ego, even though it's an abstraction, but we need to, in order to really dissolve that ego, we need to evolve and grow. We need to actually grow to the point where we understand that it's not real. Um, and then there are other people who say we need to go back to that primordial consciousness, this beingness. I think it's a little bit of it's both, and maybe Wilbur's saying it's both, but we need to go through this evolution or maturity to truly appreciate it, because a baby undifferentiates herself from their experience of the universe too, but not in the same way necessarily a sage would. And I think this is the point that Wilbur makes, that we need to go through enlightenment, go through the process to mature the ego and realize, and then dissolve it. Perhaps that's part of our development. But if that is part of our development, then most people don't develop all the way. I mean, they don't reach the peak. They kind of settle at this level, this ego level of development, after like 20 years old, and they don't go beyond that. Um, this, of course, is a problem. I mean, a lot of people have talked about this, from Maslow to Wilbur to a lot of the psychologists to Eric Fromm. I mean, there's this idea of liberation and freedom truly being impossible if we're trapped in the subject-object duality. And I think that is one of the highest forms of liberation and development, because it does return to simplicity. That's primordial awareness, but at the same time, you need to be able to be developed being enough to be able to do that. I mean, yeah, it'd be great if we just kind of always felt at one with the universe, but for some reason, this is how we've evolved, and this is, we are thinking rational beings. Evolution, putting the empirical aspect to this, we have developed these aspects of our consciousness, thinking and subject-object relations, for a reason, to survive. But just as being able to, us being the first species to realize evolution is sort of like a fundamental leap in self-awareness. Like, we're the first organism to understand how, the evolution of organisms. That's the first. And perhaps equally so, in an inner way, we're the first organism, or I guess you could say the first cultural meme to realize that the self is illusory. I mean, that's understanding a fundamental aspect of our reality, which is a trait of higher intelligence and evolution. So I think sageness or saintness or mysticism isn't a step back to some kind of primordial backward supernaturalism. It's sort of a direct observation of our consciousness in a way that was never really thought of before. Well, maybe not before. We've realized it for at least a few thousand years, but it's still, I guess you could say, um, from a inner perspective, from the inner dimension of understanding self and culture and belief and you know the inner sciences, I guess you can say, and philosophy and culture. This is as big as the discovery, of Darwin and evolution, because just as that's a self-awareness of development on the outer side, you know, contemplative science is a discovery of the inner side. How the self is illusory. I mean, that's a huge leap. That's a very fundamental aspect. So this can definitely influence social sciences and the psychologists and philosophers in a very profound way, and totally take a new step, a new direction if it was mainstream. And I think it's becoming more mainstream. I think there are a lot more speakers than there used to be, or at least just as much in this as last century as in this century. Um, the trend has been to not worry much about that and only focus on the outer side, empirical science. But I think interior science is making a comeback because it is more sophisticated. It is able to integrate the inner and the outer. Just as I'm saying, you know, there's Darwinism and then there's contemplative science, which both seek to understand profound realizations about the nature of who we are. And I guess I'll stop on this note. But yeah, that's just something to think about. Make a response video if you're interested, or leave a comment.